Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
And I'm Jonna Johnson.
Help yourself to a virtual donut and join us for our weekly sprint through the week's tech news. We're going to talk about a BlueCat acquisition, Cisco killing an IoT product, RPDI vulnerabilities, patent trolls, and more. We are sponsored today by Autocon. You can join the packet pushers and 400 fellow network nerds at Autocon 2 this November. Autocon's an independent conference dedicated to advancing the state of the art of network automation. Learning opportunities abound, from hands-on workshops to presentations from network engineers deploying automation in the wild. Registration is open now. Go to networkautomation.forum/Autocon2. That's networkautomation.forum/Autocon2 for the agenda and registration details. And we'll see you November 18th to the 22nd in Denver, Colorado. And before we jump into the news, just a reminder that Packet Pushers offers a growing roster of podcasts for professional development. Our newest include Technically Leadership on how to lead and manage technical teams, Total Network Operations, which focuses on best practices and tools for network operators, and coming soon, N is for Networking, where Ethan Banks and Holly Metlitsky dive into networking essentials. You can find them all at packetpushers.net. All right, a quick FU or follow-up. Jonna, last week you brought a story to us about new DOCSIS standards to improve performance of cable internet, and I kind of joked about my eyes blurring over from boredom. But a listener wrote in to say, I'm happy to hear about continued updates to the DOCSIS standard. I'm not too far from a city, but can only get Comcast cable or DSL at my house. They're a couple of blocks from fiber, but CenturyLink doesn't seem to be wanting to do it, and they're behind a hill where a local WISP couldn't reach us. So yes, DOCSIS still matters, and I hope this listener gets good service.
Yeah, that was a great follow-up. And please do remember, you can send your follow-up at packetpushers.net/FU to let us know what you think.
Yeah. All right, diving into the news, BlueCat, they make DDI, that's DHCP, DNS, and IPAM software for enterprise networks. They're acquiring network performance monitoring company LiveAction for an undisclosed amount. BlueCat's buying LiveAction from Insight Partners, a private equity firm. LiveAction offers products for network topology, flow analysis, SNMP monitoring. It also owns the OmniPeak protocol analyzer. And Johnny, you know it for other areas as well.
Yeah, it actually is a performance management software for UCaaS and generally voice and video over the network. So they basically not just monitor, but they also have things like capacity planning, which from my perspective is incredibly useful, because when companies started converting over to Teams, sometimes the network engineers in-house would not be aware of how much more bandwidth they needed and how much more quality of service they needed in order to ensure that the Teams voice and video worked optimally. So that's actually a niche sort of product, but it's incredibly important for, a critical application for a lot of folks.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see a DDI company buying its way into network performance monitoring and others. It's not something I would have anticipated, but I am assuming that BlueCat, wants to grow beyond the DDI market. I think that there's obviously a ceiling on how many DDI platforms you can sell. Back in 2023, BlueCat acquired a company called Identity, which monitors the health of network appliances like firewalls and load balancers. Now they're adding full-scale network performance monitoring, so I guess they're looking to grow revenues by moving into adjacent sectors.
Yeah, I think so. And I really do think that the combination of monitoring and capacity planning and management is going to be very useful for them in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious to see what BlueCat does with them. They could sort of go two ways. One is just let that license income keep rolling in. I also think because things like flow records are a rich source of data for network and app performance, maybe, and can also be leveraged for things like troubleshooting and security. If BlueCat has ambitions to invest in data analytics and maybe ML, they could really take advantage of that richness to build out new capabilities or new applications.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned you had one red flag on this about the fact that they've been owned by a private equity firm for a while.
Yeah, that is the one red flag, because, again, is this a thing where BlueCat's actually going to invest in it, or just sort of like what private equity companies do, just kind of let it run, or maybe even try to cut costs and squeeze it as much as they can to just get as much revenue out of it? So I'm guessing that LiveAction hasn't necessarily been keeping up with advances in like data collection, analytics, data science, and ML. Maybe this is an opportunity for BlueCat to put some resources there if they really want to sort of drive this product forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Insight likes to claim that it really does try to drive things forward and invest heavily. But if it's not clear that the claim is matched by reality. It may be. I'm not saying I have inside information that it's not, but yeah, it's something to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah,
if you're a LiveAction user and interested, you can always hit us up, packetpushers.net/FU if you've got insights.
Yeah, we'd love to know what you think about the acquisition and LiveAction's ability to stay on the cutting edge. Okay, moving right along, T-Mobile has to pay a fine of $15.75 million over data breaches from 2021 to 2023, a settlement that it's made with the FCC. It also has to invest the same amount in improved security. T-Mobile is coming under a consent decree requiring it to generally step up its data management practices and raise its baseline cybersecurity posture, including by adopting, quote, robust modern architectures like zero trust and phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, end quote. Side note, multi-factor authentication should be state-of-the-art, not necessarily modern. It's certainly not cutting edge. It's also required to create and empower a CISO. Again, side note, if they don't have a CISO, that's a huge problem. The civil fine is the third multi-million-dollar fine T-Mobile has had to pay this year. There's really not a lot to say here other than, good heavens, people, if you're a company in this day and age and you don't have a CISO and you're not implementing multi-factor authentication, then you are making a big mistake. I remember when the CISO role first rolled out, it was actually very funny to watch because it was in the mid-90s. And one day, companies started getting CISOs. And the next year, then the CISOs actually started getting a team. And then after that, they started getting budgets so they could actually buy products. And at that point, you could say that there was a fully functioning cybersecurity capability inside the company. I could go off on a long tangent about the roles that CISOs should hold and the reporting structure they should have.
Right.
In general, if you're listening to this, this may be counterintuitive, but we've done primary research on this for years. It turns out that you want your CISO to be reporting into a line of business executive, not to the CIO. So it's great if they report to the COO, chief legal officer, chief risk officer, CEO, but anyone but the CIO, which is still the most common reporting structure in most organizations. In any event, for T-Mobile, getting the CISO would be the first step.
So if we can go down that rabbit hole a little bit, why is that? Why not report to the CIO? Because that's where I think the most logical place would be.
It's very simple but subtle. It's basically the mindset of having the CISO report to the CIO is essentially, I bought a car, which is my technology infrastructure, and I need to protect that car by getting a warranty. So the CISO's job is to ensure the security of the, technology infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case because the damage, a hacker can damage much more than just the infrastructure. A hacker can damage the entire company. It can take the company out of production via DDoS or via ransomware. So in a sense, the CISO is protecting the entire company from the infrastructure, which means it's, number one, antithetical to what the CIO is trying to do, which is build and maintain that infrastructure. And number two is about protecting the entire company, not limited to the infrastructure. So it's actually really interesting what we've been recommending for a while because the SEC and others have been putting in place these draconian rules that say if you don't do everything right from a cybersecurity perspective, your cybersecurity person can go to jail, mm-hmm. which is actually true. Our recommendation is that the CISO report into a chief risk officer that, unlike the current chief risk officer, who mostly just assesses risks, is actually empowered to be a chief risk mitigation officer. Because the right way to think about cybersecurity risk is in a portfolio with everything else. Risks that you can get from, weather, risks that you can get from global terrorism, risks that you can get from politics,
right.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So basically, if you're sitting here saying, I've got, $10 million to devote to risk mitigation, which risk looks most grievous? Where can it do the most good? That's how you want to be assessing it, not against, do we spend $10 million on cybersecurity or do we spend $10 million on a new server farm? Right.
Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah, that is a subtle difference, but I take your point. Yeah, that's interesting. My takeaway on this, I'd love to see the FCC handing out fines for data breaches when there are things like that they don't use multi-factor authentication. Come on, that's a gimme.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that they're also saying, in addition to the fine you have to pay, you also need to invest the same amount in security. I sort of like that impetus, but again, this could just be, you can easily spend $15 million on cybersecurity
exactly.
and get nothing out of it, really. So how it's spent and what it's spent on is really where the rubber meets the road.
Right. And hopefully they'll just take it seriously enough to actually do the right thing. But we'll see.
Right. If they can make an investment into, process as opposed to just, well, we bought some firewalls, we checked that box, I would feel better. Yeah. But who knows?
Yeah. And if anybody's listening to this, hey, there's a great job opening out there.
Right. Yeah. Polish up your CISO resume and head over to T-Mobile. Moving on, Cisco has announced the end of life for its LoRaWAN gateways and associated products. LoRaWAN is a wireless spec for connecting battery-powered IoT devices over long distances, up to 15 kilometers in rural areas. LoRaWAN is used in sectors like agriculture, utilities, manufacturing, and other places where you want to deploy low-powered sensors and meters and be able to connect them to a wireless network to get readings and data from them. Cisco's end-of-life notice didn't provide a reason for the company's exit. There is an article in the Register that speculates it's due to cost-cutting. You don't need a lot of gear to support LoRaWAN endpoints, so Cisco gateways likely weren't driving much revenue for the company. I will say the end-of-life notice is pretty terse and straightforward. There are no migration options inside the Cisco portfolio, and then it's got the list of the last day of sales, the last day of software support, the last day of security updates, and so on. If you are on the Cisco LoRaWAN platform, you might want to check those out.
Yeah, and the only thing I can say is I think this is a blow for the spec itself. I know for IoT, back when we looked at it in much greater depth, that was one of the sort of up and coming specs. And, the question is where do you place your bets for wireless? But as usual, Wi-Fi tends to be doing just well enough. I do understand, and please don't write in and say, you don't understand the differences. Yes, we do. It's just that for various applications, LoRaWAN is actually a better optimized spec. But as you pointed out, Drew, it looks like Cisco's just not getting the revenue from those applications, and it is what it is.
Yeah, there's an organization called LoRa Alliance that is obviously pushing the specification. They do have listings on their website of gear and providers you can get if you are on Cisco and need to go elsewhere. So if that's a need you're having, maybe go check that out.
Yeah, and you have about a year to do it. I think you said, Drew, that the updates are not going to get released after January 1st, 2026, and security patches will stop at the end of 2026. So actually, in fairness, you probably have 2 years to do the migration, but you really want to start looking now. Yeah,
the security patches are the ones I'd be worried about. And yeah, you do have till the end of December 2026 on those. So a little time, but probably best to start moving. Just a quick break to remind you that the Autocon 2 conference takes place November 18th through the 22nd in Denver, Colorado. The Packet Pushers are media partners, and we'd love to see you there. Autocon is an independent conference dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art of network automation. It's the place to learn more about the practice of network automation, orchestration, observability, AI tooling, education, processes and standards, and more. Come and hear what your peers are doing in their networks, what solution providers are bringing to the table, and what's happening with open source and all things network automation. You can go to networkautomation.forum/Autocon2 to get all the details and to register. That's networkautomation.forum/Autocon2. And we hope to see you in Denver this November 18th through the 22nd.
And moving right along to another piece of telco-related news. On Monday, September 30th, more than 100,000 Verizon self-service outages were reported, starting at about 10 a.m. Eastern and peaking about an hour later. The service disruption affected users across the lower 48 states, though not all of them. The outage was largely resolved by 6 p.m. Eastern. Verizon has not yet released details on the cause of the problem and an explanation as to why some users had service and others did not. The FCC is investigating. As a Verizon user, I do recall this because I remember thinking, that's weird. My bars went away. And then the next time I looked, the bars were back. So I'd be interested to see how many folks actually were affected and didn't even realize they were affected, because I was busy doing something else and didn't really need the, wireless coverage during the day on Monday. But, yet again, telcos are making mistakes. I think I do tend to have a little bit of a warm fuzzy in my heart for telcos who are trying to do things at massive scale while getting economies of scale, so centralizing a lot of the management and administration. And the problem is if you get anything wrong, it's never wrong on a small in a small scale. It becomes wrong in a very big scale.
Yes, that is the issue for telcos. I will say I'm also a Verizon customer. I did not notice the outage, although I will also note that at one point I tried using a mobile internet connection, a 5G internet connection from a different provider, and they had an outage and I was offline and they said it wouldn't be back up for 4 days. And I was like, nope, can't do it. This is not worth it.
This isn't working.
And went back to fiber. So until we get the mobile infrastructure is generally pretty good, but it's got to be rock solid, particularly if you're using it for internet.
Exactly. And on a perennial favorite topic, security researchers have identified at least 53, quote, end quote, vulnerabilities in the RPKI packages that are supposed to lead to more secure and reliable BGP. 3 German cybersecurity researchers released a pre-press version of a forthcoming paper called RPKI, Not Perfect But Good Enough, detailing their analysis of the Resource Public Key Infrastructure, that's what it stands for, protocol, RPKI. Not just the protocol, but the packages and existing code repositories. So basically, they looked at not just the spec, but the implementations of the spec. They said they found the specifications to be inconsistent and the software and repositories to be vulnerable to, quote, persistent DDoS, authentication bypass, cache poisoning, and remote code execution attacks. Although they expressed concerns about the potential for a supply chain attack against a code repository similar to the XZ backdoor, which is a nasty little bug, they did note that so far auto-updating is not in place, so such an attack would be slow to land broadly. RPKI has been pushed by the White House as a central pillar of a much-needed effort to shore up the security and reliability of BGP, and we actually did have a discussion about that on what makes a protocol good in a recent heavy strategy episode, so you can listen to that if you want to go in greater detail.
Yeah, I'll also note that on the Packet Protector podcast that I co-host with Jennifer Manello, we did a whole episode on RPKI very recently. So if you're curious about it, go check it out. So when I saw this headline, I was like, oh, no.
Oh, no, right.
But I will say, I'll note that in the paper, they do note that of the 53 vulnerabilities that they discovered, most of them have been fixed now. And also, these kind of papers are important because if RPKI is to be widely deployed, it does need to be secure. So I'm glad they're raising the flag. I feel like, though, it's not RPKI sucks and we should just get rid of it. One of the reasons is, according to the paper, RPKI software development seems to be primarily driven by open source projects of very small teams of active contributors. The paper says projects range from 1 to 5 active contributors. So obviously, if we are going to roll out RPKI more broadly, we need more concerted effort around investment and attention by the large stakeholders who are meant to use this. So telcos, hyperscalers, and so on, who contribute time and resources. I'll also say,
and I would,
yeah, go ahead.
I would add to that, it's, of course, those of you who remember the Mythical Man Month about, the old joke about programmers, you don't get better code by throwing more programmers at the problem any more than you get, faster babies by throwing more pregnant women at the problem. But one of the areas that they could be contributing the time and resources is actually fire hardening the implementations, which I think is something that usually gets short shrift. So if you're listening and you are working for a telco hyperscaler or a security provider and you're thinking, what would we be doing with time and resources? I think really fire hardening and battle testing the spec and its implementations would be very, very helpful. Yeah,
that's I kind of noted something like that too. I mean, we definitely want to strive for well-written, well-designed software that's secure at the outset. But if we wait for perfect, it never gets rolled out. And it's when you start rolling things out and the rubber actually hits the road where you start to get these opportunities to fire harden code. And broader adoption also means more stakeholders who can contribute to more effective and secure software. So it's a good thing the paper's out. We can't hide our head in the sands and pretend, everything is perfect. But I also do think RPKI is an effective mechanism for some of the risks associated with BGP, primarily route hijacking. So I'm still on board.
And just on a side note, when they say they expressed concerns about the potential for a supply chain attack against a code repository similar to the XZ backdoor, if you're not familiar with XZ backdoor, please go look it up because it is easy to discover if you know where to look and very, very hard to discover if you don't. We recently used it as the foundation for tabletop exercises for one of our clients, and they did eventually, to their credit, figure out what was going on, but none of them actually realized it was XZ backdoor. They just deduced what it was. So it's something to be familiar with because that way you can pick up the signs, which are very subtle. So basically you'll see logs that don't match in 2 different cybersecurity apps. I don't want to hijack this in conversation, but it's worth digging into and learning a bit about.
Yeah, I think what they're getting at is that because these are open source software projects, and because they are not dealing with a lot of active contributors, a malicious actor could come in, contribute code to the software, purposely building in malicious code or backdoors that they could exploit later. That's the supply chain aspect of it. Yeah,
exactly. The main thing is that essentially once you install the code, it is malware, and that's what they're talking about, and that's what happens with XZ backdoor. it's not an attack from the outside. It's an attack from here you've just installed poison software, and there are ways to avoid it, but knowing how it behaves is important.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving right along to our patent trolls, we have a two-pronged story on patent trolls today. Amazon was told to pay $30.5 million to networking patent holder Acceleration Bay. It's currently the holder of patents awarded originally to Boeing in the 2000s. They sued AWS for willful infringement, meaning with full knowledge that they were infringing on the patents in its CloudFront service, which is a content distribution network. The case was heard in Delaware, and the jury found against Amazon. The award could be increased by as much as 200% as the court weighs penalizing AWS for the willful nature of the infringement. Acceleration Bay has filed many similar cases against not just Amazon, but online gaming companies in recent years. And to be honest, these are its patents and they are getting abused. So hurrah to them for fighting, because sometimes people just give up. What are your thoughts on that, Drew?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons we said this was a double story is that Cloudflare also released a blog saying that they won a case against a patent troll. They're going to get $225,000 from a patent portfolio holder that tried and failed to sue Cloudflare for patent infringement on an old routing patent. Not only is Cloudflare getting some money, the portfolio holder also signed an agreement not to sue Cloudflare going forward. So I think the big takeaway is that when it comes to these, patent portfolio companies / trolls, sometimes it's worth fighting them in court. And I think AWS, which has gobs and gobs of money, knew they could take a hit if they did lose in this case, and that in the long term, it will be more beneficial to them to defeat this in court. They lost, but I don't think the judgment's going to sting them all that much.
Well, and I just want to clarify something, because I called this about patent trolls. You would assume that I'm calling Acceleration Bay a patent troll, and I just want to clarify that my personal position is that they are not, that they actually legit own these patents and should have been able to use them and should not, and Amazon should not have been using them. Whereas I don't think that's the case with Cloudflare's patent trolls. So I just want to be clear that just because I said it was two cases about patent trolls, I really don't think one of them is. So please don't write us and say, hey, I'm from Acceleration Bay and you called us a patent troll, and that's not right.
We're now taking you to court because these patent portfolio holders can be litigious. Yeah, that's the thing. It's hard to maybe distinguish between, I'm a legitimate holder. I mean, they're all legitimate holders of the patents, but yeah, it's a difficult issue because it's an IP portfolio, and if it's legal, then you got to pay. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's tough. But again, some companies try to fight it, and some win, some don't. So. All right, let's wrap up with some space networking. The U.S. government is sending has sent 40 Starlink satellite systems to the U.S. state of North Carolina to provide internet and communication services to responders to the aftermath of Hurricane Helene that hit that area and others. The White House says 140 additional systems are being shipped also to support responders in counties affected by Hurricane Helene. I just thought I would call this out because natural disasters are getting more frequent and more intense due to climate change, and the role of satellite broadband as a disaster recovery or business continuity option is likely to increase, even if we're not talking about, just helping citizens in national disaster. It's your own business as well. Yeah, and I just want to highlight something. There is a rumor going around that the U.S. government is not aiding the state of North Carolina at all, and that FEMA is withholding funds. Please, if you are propagating that rumor, try to look up your facts, because number one, sending 40 Starlink systems is not failing to help. It's actually helping. And number two, that rumor has actually been disproved by reliable sources. So I don't know why it started, but, when there isn't effective communications, it's easy to start rumors, I guess is the way to put it. And I would also point out that actually satellite first responders has been a thing for quite a long time. I actually had a very good friend who recently retired from the EU, and he was actually part of their first responder strike force. So he jumped out of helicopters carrying, packages of satellite gear and things like that. Wow. So, it is a job. It's an interesting job, and it's a good thing that we're doing more of it. Yeah, I'll also note we just recorded a heavy networking with a wireless internet service provider that serves customers in the remote mountainous regions in the U.S. state of Idaho. Essentially, they're putting wireless gear on top of towers and shooting that signal across mountains. Sometimes those towers go down because of a power outage or wildfire or snow or whatever. And in one case, there's a town they're serving where they essentially just fall back to a Starlink connection if the WISP network goes down. So if you're curious about those details, that episode's coming out in early November. But I just think it's interesting that satellite is now, it seems like a pretty legitimate backup option for these kind of conditions.
Yep. And it is, I will say, Idaho is remote and mountainous. I had not been there before earlier this spring. And not only is it remote and mountainous, but it's also beautiful. So if you haven't been, go visit it because it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, you can still get internet there, too.
Exactly.
All right, John, that wraps up our news. If folks want to get in touch with you online or just see what you're up to, where can they go?
Best place is to hit me up at my company, Nemertes.com, and like Nancy, E-M like Mary, E-R-T like Thomas, E-S.com. But some of you have also been coming through LinkedIn, where I'm fairly active. So by all means, come visit either LinkedIn or through the company site. However, I'm always happy to hear from listeners.
I'm Drew Connery Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at Drew_CM. I'm blogging at packetpushers.net. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. Thank to our sponsor, Autocon. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Network Break. If you like the show, it'd be great if you could leave a recommendation for us on Apple Podcasts or just share a link with a friend. You can always send us comments, corrections, or kudos at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU's for follow-up, and we do take it seriously, so please reach out. As always, thanks for listening.